On December 28, 1973, President Richard Nixon signed the Endangered Species Act into law, accumulated under years of work by environmentalists who are exercising their ethical and civic responsibilities to protect the environment where species of wildlife have the right to exist respected by us humans. On June 12, 1973, Democrat Senator Harrison Williams introduced the Endangered Species Act in the United States Congress, gaining wide support from his Republican colleagues. The Senate unanimously approved the bill on July 24, 1973. The U.S. House of Representatives gathered the vast majority of the original vote of 390 to 12 in favor of the ESA on September 18, 1973. Russell E. Train and William Ruckleshaw's environmental figures were central to the initial testing of the ESA. A joint conference committee was called on to merge both the House and Senate's versions of the bill, and reported it on December 19, 1973. The same day, the final conference vote of 355 to 4 for the U.S. House of Representatives were supported. That same day, both the House and Senate approved its legislation. On December 28, 1973, President Richard Nixon signed the Endangered Species Act into law with bipartisan support. As he did so, he wrote, "Nothing is more priceless and worthy of preservation than the rich array of animal life which our country has been blessed. It is a many-faceted treasure, the value to scholars, scientists, and nature lovers alike, and forms a vital part of the heritage we all share as Americans." To truly understand the Endangered Species Act, you must know what precipitated it. Here is some of the story of what happened before this event. It started with the founding of Yellowstone National Park in 1873, which started the national park system. In the same year, the American Association for the Advancement of Science petitioned Congress to halt the unwise use of natural resources. And in 1891, John Muir founded the Sierra Club, and thus the environmental movement began. However, many people did not like the prospect of setting aside land for ecological purposes with no direct economic value. In the early 19th century, Americans began to notice the disappearance of many bird species, once very common, such as the passenger pigeon. As a result, the Lacey Act of 1900 was established. But this act, unlike its predecessors, the Weeks-McLean Act and subsequent Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, the Lacey Act was put in place for species of economic and recreational value, rather than their ecological value. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act and prior Weeks-McLean Act were put in place to protect species because of their ecological value. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act was established to protect migratory bird species internationally by including 3 treaties prior to the ESA, first with Canada, then with Mexico, and then one with Japan. Then came the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act of 1940. This provided a criminal penalty for any sort of taking of bald and golden eagles, their nests, eggs, feathers, or parts. However, this act was not quite enough to protect the bald eagles. Due to the wild commercial use of DDT in hunting, the bald eagle had drastically declined in population. DDT is recognized as a contributor to the decline of many predatory bird species. But Rachel Carson would speak out against the use of pesticide DDT and wrote the book Silent Spring, which told the story of a town that had been sprayed with DDT. No birds sang when the spring came, and almost everything died. She was the key factor of the banning of the horrible insecticide, which in turn contributed to the recovery of the bald eagle and its eventual delisting in 2009. In 1966, the Endangered Species Preservation Act was passed into law, which created the first endangered species list in 1967. Then came the Endangered Species Conservation Act of 1969, which gave further protection to endangered and threatened species, amending the Endangered Species Preservation Act. On the 2nd of December 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency was founded, and later that month, on the 31st, the Clean Air Act was passed into law. In 1972, the Clean Water Act was passed into law. On February 8, 1972, in a message to Congress, President Richard Nixon, calling current environmental efforts inadequate, asked for a stronger law to protect endangered species of wildlife that would give the federal government more power to put protective measures into place when a species was listed. Senators Mark Hatfield, Harrison A. Williams, as well as Congressman John Dingell wrote the ESA. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, are responsible for implementing the ESA. In 1974, signatory governments agreed on the Convention of International Trade on Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna, aka CITES, which protects species outside of the U.S. by banning the import of endangered or threatened species, their parts or products derived from those species. In 1975, CITES was passed into law in the U.S. CITES protected species such as the red kangaroo, which had been listed as an endangered species in 1974. The import of the species was banned, and this contributed to recovery in 1995. In 1978, a small fish known as a snail darter was listed, colliding heavily with the construction of the Telco Dam. In the 1990s, the spotted owl was threatened in the Pacific Northwest, and this started the so-called timber wars between loggers and environmentalists. Mark Hatfield wrote that he believes the human element of the act had been lost, and the ESA is being applied very differently than how he envisioned it, even though he continues to support the act. He wrote also about how shifting the supply of wood from the Pacific Northwest to protect the spotted owl would then cause the supply to be shifted to other places that lack the other environmental laws and protections, that are unprepared for the harvest of timber, causing the net result to be less protection for the environment. The Endangered Species Act has prevented many species from extinction, such as the bald eagle, our national symbol, by providing a framework for us to follow. Over the decades, there has been a gradual erosion of the Endangered Species Act. Controversies have sprouted up, some about its effectiveness, some about whether or not it is just being an impediment for economic growth, and the once strong bipartisan support for the act has unraveled. Today, the battle between federal protections, the greed of large corporations, private landowners, as well as environmentalists and anti-environmentalists still rages on. Today, little creatures still thrive in the forests, the prairies, and the lakes, but the new threat of global warming threatens to engulf these havens, and as the environmentalists before us have done in other crises, we can change this.